Benjamin Lincoln is a local hero, and he gained fame for years as a general under George Washington. And this is a portrait of him that hung for years in the Customs House in Boston, where he was collector of the port after the war. And so he gained fame as a general, but he had fame long before he went into the military.
Now, when you refer to him as the general,
Yeah.
when you peel back the layers, what makes him one of the most historic figures in the town of Hingham?
Well, it was not only his military service, but his local service. He, for years and for several generations, he and his father and grandfather and great-grandfather before him, all named Benjamin Lincoln, were selectively town clerk and selectman for years and years. As a matter of fact, they passed down the town clerk's job, father to son to grandson to great-grandson, for more than 50 years.
That's interesting.
Interesting, it was the only paid position in town.
That is interesting.
Yeah.
Now, where are we going to go today?
We're going to go down to Fawkes Square, where we'll see the house that he grew up in, which is currently occupied by direct descendants of Benjamin Lincoln.
So shall we go?
Let's go.
Hi, Charlie. Thank you for having us.
Nice to have us over.
Retreat.
Glad to be here. Well, here we are in the house. This is where Benjamin was born, lived here really all his life.
Yes, absolutely.
1732 to 1810.
Yes.
Can you tell us anything about Benjamin Lincoln just from living here?
I think living here, Rosie and I sometimes don't know whether we've lived here for 20 years or 200 years. And it's because we're surrounded by memories that have been recorded in diaries and passed down to us. And so it's very personal. It really is.
Yeah. And Alec, what do you know about Benjamin Lincoln's education?
I don't think he had education beyond what today would say be the 8th grade, formal education. But it was only because there were so many activities that required his attention. Right off outside the house here was the malt house and the brewery, which the family ran. Imagine a brewery in the historic district.
Right.
But it was right outside here.
And he had an honorary degree from Harvard?
He later on got an honorary degree from Harvard. And as I say, his son, Benjamin, who would have been the 5th Benjamin in line, I think, did go to Harvard. And unfortunately for Hingham and for him, he left and went to Boston to work as a lawyer, and he never became town clerk or selectman in Hingham. So that ended the unbroken string for 75 years of Benjamin Lincolns who were selectman and town clerk in Hingham.
Charlie, was this home built all together or was it done in stages?
In stages, and I can very quickly, the earliest part was prior to the 1665 or thereabouts in that northeast corner. And then the house moved towards the west. And in 1715, Benjamin Lincoln, the general's father, added made it into an L shape. And this was the east wall of the L shape. And you can see the original closet still in the attic.
Wow.
And then finally, in 1795, General Lincoln, or Benjamin Lincoln, raised it to the Georgian architecture that it is today,
Right.
and added this front entrance hall and the front rooms.
With a wide stairwell so
Yes.
that the general can make it upstairs.
Yes, well, but also it has a certain amount of grandeur to it, and
Yeah.
I think there's a reason for that. His acquaintanceship, his friendship even with Washington and Mount Vernon and Jefferson and
Madison.
and Adams and Quincy
Monroe,
all
yeah,
had
yeah.
sort of physical things to.
They were all men of wealth and had large houses and estates, and he sort of felt he had to live up to that standard.
Yeah, to the extent he had any ego, I
Yeah.
think you're right.
Yeah.
So now, just make yourself at home. Really.
Thank you
I'll
very
be here
much.
if you
We'll
need any
look
help.
around. There's a lot to see.
Well, it's
Thank
lovely to
you.
see you both again.
Okay.
Thank you. Wouldn't it be great if we had a relative to talk to or something of that nature?
I think we do.
Oh, look, it's
this
Todd
is Todd.
Gardner.
Is it you're
Hi.
Hi.
so a cousin?
I'm a third cousin,
a third cousin.
8 times removed. Well, the thing that I think about Benjamin Lincoln is how he was so much tied to Hingham, and the ability to have kind of the whole church and the family and the town were so important to him, and he couldn't leave outside of Hingham without thinking or drawing back a reflection about how much he loved the town of Hingham. And this would go on through his entire life. There's so many interesting artifacts here, including
What's that? Oh, is
his
this
cane.
Was this his crutch actually?
Yeah.
When he was injured, when 1777, and
Battle outside the Battle of Saratoga, and he
after
was
that-
shot in his left ankle.
for the rest of his life, which is 25, another 40 years practically, he was a cripple and had a hard time getting around. And he used this, and I think he walked every day to downtown Hingham to visit the people in the stores and
did.
so on. And this is how he did it.
And I think it's interesting that Washington chose Benjamin. And the reason he chose Benjamin is because Benjamin knew the mindset of the New Englander, which was different than the mindset of somebody from Virginia. And so even though maybe he struggled in Charleston in the siege and had to surrender, which was devastating to the cause, Lincoln saw in him somebody with the ability to come back and stay with what he'd covenanted to help his country. And so when we get then to the final Yorktown scene, as you know, the sword is surrendered. But the reason why it's surrendered to Benjamin is because of what happened earlier at the siege of Charleston and how he was treated.
It was his revenge, so to speak.
Yes, yeah.
And Washington gave him that honor. Well, that's very interesting, and because of that's how he has, to the extent he is well known around the country, it's because he did accept Cornwallis's surrender, ending the Revolutionary War at the Battle of Yorktown.
Right.
As you know, right after the war, he served again as anonymously the Secretary of War for George Washington, but as Secretary of War, he was basically in charge of reintegrating the soldiers into the peacetime economy. So it was the Secretary of Peace rather than the Secretary of War.
And it's also interesting in along the lines of that with the Articles of Confederation, which were kind of loose, he learned to navigate that and be a strong proponent of the Constitution.
He was after the war, he was the first commander of the Society of Cincinnati, which was the organization for previous people who had served in the Revolution. And how well he was revered, because he was the first commander and was for the rest of his life of the Order of Cincinnati.
I also think it's interesting that Washington relied heavily on him during Shays' Rebellion when some of the men felt mistreated. And who did he turn to but Benjamin to go handle that situation as well, which he did effectively.
So he played a key role in many respects. a lot of them making use of his ability to communicate with people locally.
Right. And that's what he was terrific at.
Yeah.
So this room is one of the oldest rooms in the house. It's got wonderful pictures and portraits of Benjamin and Washington and his crutch, and there's a musket ball here. But have you guys seen upstairs?
No.
You should go look.
Oh,
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, great.
Go ahead. Well, here we are in a bedroom where several generations of Benjamin Lincolns slept at night, including our Benjamin, his father, and his grandfather. And they influenced his career because in those days it was very much the practice that the son would continue whatever work the father was involved in. So locally that meant that they were all selectmen and town clerk, selectmen and town clerk, and so on, and also involved in the militia. And his father fought and led the Hingham militia in the French and Indian War, and then Benjamin, of course, in the Revolutionary War. So they taught themselves, and they each followed the same type of military career, which was generally administrative. Recruiting the soldiers, seeing that they got their pay and their dinners and all that kind of thing. And that's where he showed his ability to organize people and to organize events. And it was the military that gave him the opportunity not only to do it, to show regionally the skills that he had learned within the town,
Right.
but also to demonstrate them to General Washington,
Okay.
who recruited him to do the same thing for the whole country.
So he was a great organizer?
He was a great organizer, a great administrator, and he knew how to communicate with people, and he attended to details, large and small, and that's how he made his career.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And I recognize everything in this, but I just noticed those hooks on the ceiling. Did you ask him what those are for?
Yes, they're for a cradle. They hooked it on, and then the cradle could hang right next to the bed.
Very nice. Benjamin probably spent some time in that cradle
Yes,
when
exactly.
he was little.
Oh, look, it's Pastor Steve. How are you?
Good to see you.
Good to see you. I understand towards the end of Benjamin Lincoln's life that there was a controversy with the New North Church. Could you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. It involved the splitting of one church into two. So the old ship had their pastor left, Henry Ware, who was a friend of Ben Lincoln. He left in early 1805 to go to Harvard, and that left a void with a pulpit supply, the preacher, that kind of spiritual leadership wasn't there. And that set off this whole chain of events where different preachers were tried out, usually on a 4-week basis. And they the majority settled on one man, Joseph Richardson, who was unacceptable to a minority.
He was a Dartmouth graduate.
He was from Charlestown. Totally.
And he had apparently asked a young woman to be his wife, and then changed his mind.
Yes, he broke an engagement,
Yeah.
and that was serious. That was serious business, and that was up in Charlestown. And there were other questions about his character and his.
Well, worse than that, he was a Jeffersonian Democrat at a time when the Federalists were still in charge here in Hingham. Benjamin Lincoln being
Ben was
one
a
of them.
Federalist, yeah.
Right.
There was also an incident that was recorded in this book written by one of the Thaxters, where Richardson and this other man were walking in Hingham, and toward them came this young woman, and she was pretty well dressed. I don't know exactly how. And this man tipped his cap and said hello, so Richardson tipped his cap and said hello. And a little further on, his companion said, "Do you know who that, you didn't know her, did you?" He said, "No, I didn't know her." So, well, she's not really a woman of good standing, or she had a low standing, and is all related to her occupation, so to speak. And that further casted questions to his character. So this raged on for a year and a half. There were meetings back and forth. We want to call him, we don't want him, on and on and on. So eventually in 1806, about a year later, they decided that we should just split up. And there was a meeting at the North Meeting House, which was the old ship, and it was unanimous that they voted to separate. And that set up, or started in motion, the wheels to create this new church, which became, after some controversy about the name, they wanted to take the name with them, and the silver.
And the endowment, if they could get it.
Yeah,
too.
if they could get it. But since they were a minority, and the deacons had the silver, so it's, possession is 9 points of the law. They settled on being third parish and the third church society, which became known as New North later, but they were the third church.
These were very partisan times, not only within the church, but politically. There were the Federalists, the old line followers of George Washington and so on, and John Adams, and the Jeffersonian Democrats, who were ascendant politically at that time. And it was so bad, not only did the old ship church have to split up, but if you were going to Boston, there were 2 ferry lines that you could ride on one boat or the other. And if your party's boat, the Federalist boat, left early or wasn't sailing, you'd stay in Boston overnight rather than ride on the other people's. You wouldn't take the other boat.
Right.
And it was that way in bars here in Hingham, restaurants. It was if we think these are partisan days today, it was far more so in that time.
You'd get whacked
Very
by,
tense.
Yeah.
you'd physically be assaulted.
Yeah.
Layer on top of that,
Yeah.
the beginnings of Unitarianism,
Right.
which is what happened when Henry Ware went to Harvard.
Yeah.
He helped form Harvard Divinity School.
Right.
And the old line Calvinists there said, no, we don't want that. So they left and formed their own school, which became known as, it was the Andover Theological School,
Yeah.
which eventually merged with Newton Seminary to become Andover Newton Theological School, my alma mater. So all this stuff happened in Hingham.
And it took a long time for people to get over this too. The thing about that is that at that time, not only was the church separated at that time, but it continued for decades after that. He would try to set up exchange ministries with the other churches in the town, but they wouldn't have anything to do with the old ship for years. They were sort of isolated within the religious community because of that split.
Yep.
But we know that from being upstairs here in the house, that it was directly across to the New North. And right over your shoulder is that picture of
Right.
General Lincoln sitting by this very window
And you can see the
in this
church
very chair
right there.
looking out at the New North Church. And I think that's just amazing that history has continued, and you can relive it yourself by sitting right in that chair looking out the window. Well, right between here and the church is the statue of Abraham Lincoln. And a number of people wonder why in this area where we have Benjamin Lincoln's house, and this is a National Historic Landmark, why there's a statue of Abraham here. And that's because Abraham's ancestors came from Hingham and lived all around us in these houses across the street. were several various times great-grandfathers of Abraham Lincoln. He didn't know this at the time when he was president because genealogy advanced a lot since then. But when his ancestor, who was Samuel Lincoln, came to Hingham in 1637, he had two brothers here also. And his first house was right where the Talbot store is, right there at the junction of North Street and Lincoln Street. That was the Samuel Lincoln house where he first settled. All of these being related later to Abraham Lincoln, which he found out very vaguely in the years toward the end of his presidency. He was writing letters to the town clerk at Hingham, inquiring about his ancestry and looking for help. So
That's interesting.
that's why we have both Benjamin and Abraham's family began their Hingham period right here in the same neighborhood.
Did Abraham Lincoln ever visit Hingham?
To our knowledge, he never did. He came to Boston, and he, in 1848, he was running for Congress, and he was a Whig at the time. This was before the Republicans started, and he came to the Whig convention, which was in Worcester.
Okay.
And I think he did meet with the Hingham town clerk then,
Right.
but he didn't come out to Hingham.
Okay.
That's too bad. So I think now we'll go out to stand in Fountain Square, which is right outside our window here, where we can look back at this house and across to the New North Church. And so we'll get out there, we'll take a look at all the Lincoln houses around here and the Abraham Lincoln statue in the church, and look back at this house, and we'll realize what a fantastic area we're standing in right here.
That sounds great. Shall we go?
Yeah.
Okay.
After you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Have fun.
Yep, thank you.
He's such an interesting man, Alec. How would you say his reputation nationwide differs from how we in this community in Hingham view him?
And should value him because, well, his role as a general under George Washington is what he's known for nationally. Here in Hingham, his significance is far greater than that because he, through his family, generation after generation, set an example that we are still trying to get people to follow today of volunteering within a community, public service, serving on boards and committees without getting a lot of credit for it always.
Right.
Yeah, but he established that and set that pattern, and it's one that we are still following today, and we really owe that tradition to Benjamin Lincoln. And there are still Lincolns in Hingham, you know.
Yes.
You did know that?
I do.
As a matter of fact, we have one of them right here, I think. Are you on your way home from church for lunch? See you?
Nice to see you.
Okay. For those of you who want to learn more about Benjamin Lincoln, there's an excellent biography of him, Benjamin Lincoln and the American Revolution. And this volume can be obtained at the Historical Society over in the old Derby Academy building. Wonderful reading, and you'll hear more about what we've had to say and perhaps the true facts as opposed to some of the ones we think we made up.